Midnight Raiders, the Pascal Keenan tragedy, 1877. Fresh graves lay beneath the Texas moonlight, each marked by a rough-hewn wooden cross. The earth was still loose, dark against the fresh September snow that had begun falling across Monog County. In this desolate stretch of frontier, between the growing cities of Dallas and Wichita Falls, these crude markers stood as silent witnesses to one of the bloodiest attacks of 1870. Welcome to Native Legends and History Stories, where we unearth America's untold frontier history. Hit subscribe to join our weekly journey through time. 18 Texas Rangers arrived at the scene, their horses' hooves breaking through ice-crusted snow. Lead Ranger A.J. Soule and his men had ridden hard from their camp on Big Sandy, covering 30 miles of treacherous terrain. After receiving news of the massacre, the lone cabin they approached stood as a stark reminder of frontier isolation. Its log walls measuring just 12 by 14 feet, barely large enough to shelter the two families who had made it their home. The Keenan family had claimed this patch of wilderness years before, building their cabin from the surrounding forest. They'd cleared fields for crops, established a corn crib to the east, and dug a well for fresh water. Just 200 yards northwest, they'd found a natural lake that provided water for their livestock. The nearest neighbor, Colonel Bean's ranch, set 2 miles west across open prairie. Beyond that lay O.T. Brown's homestead, marking the furthest reach of white settlement in this part of Texas. The cabin's door lay shattered in the yard, its iron hinges twisted and broken. Dark bloodstains marked the wooden doorsteps, already crusting in the bitter cold. A wooden shutter from the north-facing window lay splintered nearby, its securing pins snapped clean through. Inside, the Rangers found a scene of complete devastation. Quilts and pillows lay scattered across the rough-hewn floor, each fabric frozen stiff with blood. Broken arrows pierced the log walls, their shafts splintered from impact. One arrow spike remained embedded in a log above what had been a sleeping area, its shaft removed but its deadly point still, marking where it had missed its intended target. A half-smoked pipe rested on the stone hearth, its tobacco only partially burned, evidence of Mrs. Keenan's last peaceful moment. Her husband was hundreds of miles away in Arkansas, having left weeks earlier with hopes of trading in apples. The journey would have taken him through Indian territory, following established trade routes between frontier settlements. He'd taken one of his children with him, a decision that had inadvertently saved that child's life. Mrs. Susan Pascal's presence in the cabin spoke to another frontier reality. Though neighbors called her widow, records revealed her as abandoned, left to raise 5 children in territory where survival demanded constant vigilance. Her own belongings lay scattered among the Keenans, the two families having shared this tiny space through necessity and mutual support. Her children ranged in age from 18 months to 12 years: Bill, Ben, John, Mary, and Dolly. The cabin's position emphasized its vulnerability. To the south, a small field stretched toward a creek, its crops now withering in the early frost. The open ground offered no cover for defense, no place to hide from attacking warriors. The corn crib to the east stood as the only other structure, its shadows providing the sole refuge. On that moonlit night, the lake to the northwest, usually a blessing for the homestead, had become a staging ground for the attack. 9 horses had waited there, while their riders approached the cabin on foot. Tracks in the snow told a grim story. 9 sets of footprints, LED from the lake to the cabin's north window. The broken shutter revealed their point of entry. More tracks showed where victims had tried to flee, some barefoot, others in night clothes, all marking desperate attempts at escape. Blood trails crisscrossed the yard, leading to where settlers had later found and buried the dead. The Rangers meticulously documented these details, though the continuing snowfall threatened to erase all evidence. Within hours, the settlers who had discovered the scene had worked quickly to give the dead a proper burial. Local men had dug 7 graves on the north side of the cabin, beneath a stand of trees that had once provided shade for children's play. They'd fashioned crosses from available wood, marking each grave without names, the identities of the dead already known to all in this tight-knit, Frontier community. The Rangers found Mrs. Keenan's dress hanging across the cabin's central beam, the fabric stiff with dried blood. This wooden girder stretching from wall to wall bore deep gouges from tomahawk strikes. Local settlers had placed the dress there while preparing the bodies for burial, marking where its owner had made her final stand. Through 8-year-old Garrett Keenan's account, the Rangers pieced together the events of that September night at 10 p.m. Snow already lay thick on the ground. The temperature had dropped well below freezing, frost forming intricate patterns on the cabin's small window panes. The boy recalled how his muscles had tensed against the cold, seeping through the log walls, even beneath the heavy quilts his mother had made. Most of the children lay huddled in their beds, the Pascals on one side of the room, the Keenans on the other. Young Bill Pascal, at 12 years old, kept his arm protectively around 18-month-old Dolly. Ben and John shared another pallet, while Mary curled up near the hearth. Mrs. Pascal had wedged herself between her youngest children, as she did every night since arriving at the cabin. Mrs. Keenan sat alone by the dying fire, her pipe sending thin wisps of smoke toward the rafters. The north-facing window, barely large enough for a man to pass through, was secured by its wooden shutter, a hand-carved pin fashioned from oak, slotted through holes in both the shutter, the log wall on the south wall. The door's iron hinges had been carefully oiled against the cold, the metal catching occasional glint from the firelight. The crash came without warning. A rail likely torn from the nearby fence smashed through the shutter. Oak splinters flew across the room as the pin sheared clean through. The broken pieces scattered across Mary Pascal's bed, some landing in her hair. In the gap appeared a face, painted in stark white and black stripes, eyes gleaming in the firelight. Mrs. Keenan's pipe clattered to the hearthstones. She fell to her knees, hands clasped in desperate prayer, her words mixing English with remembered fragments of her childhood church Latin, filled the space between her and the warrior, now climbing through the window. Snow fell from his moccasins onto the floor, melting into dark patches that would soon be lost among worse stains. One by one, 8 more warriors entered. Their weapons, a mix of traditional tomahawks and captured army knives, caught the fire's light. Some wore strips of cavalry uniforms mixed with native dress. Others were wrapped in buffalo robes. Against the cold, each face bore distinct patterns of paint, but in the chaos that followed, these details blurred into a nightmare, canvas of motion and violence. The children's screams woke echoes in the cabin's rafters. Bill Pascal leaped up, pushing Dolly behind him. Ben and John scrambled from their blankets. Mrs. Pascal reached for the fireplace poker, managing one desperate swing before a tomahawk struck her arm. The Pascal's eldest daughter, Mary, ran for the door but found it already blocked. Garrett watched it all from his bed near the north window, counting each warrior as they entered, marking their weapons, noting their paths through the cabin. Even as blood began to stain the floorboards, his mind recorded details with a clarity born of terror. The distinctive limp of one warrior, the eagle feather worn by another, the cavalry brass buttons glinting on a third stolen jacket. When the warrior's attention turned to Mrs. Pascal's desperate defense of her children, Garrett saw his chance. He slipped from beneath his quilt, bare feet silent on the bloody floor. The same window the warriors had used stood open to the night as he pulled himself through. A knife slashed down, opening a deep cut from his hip to his thigh. The pain came sharp and immediate, but his mother's screams behind him hurt worse than any blade. Blood trailing in the snow, Garrett half ran, half crawled toward the corn crib. 50 yards east of the cabin, the moon cast enough light to find the dense bushes that grew alongside the structure. There, pressing himself into frozen branches, he forced himself to continue watching. Blood soaked through his nightshirt, freezing in the bitter air. But he kept counting, kept tracking each movement. For what seemed like hours, he crouched motionless in his hiding place. When silence finally fell over the cabin, he remained still, watching the window. The warriors emerged as they had entered, one by one through the broken shutter. Against the snow, their forms stood out in sharp relief. Garrett counted again, 9 figures, moving with deadly purpose toward the lake where their horses waited. through eyes already growing feverish from blood loss. He tracked their progress. The warriors mounted, their horses' hooves breaking through the snow's crust. Only when they disappeared over the western hills, their shapes becoming one with the darkness, did Garrett allow himself to move. His legs had frozen stiff, his wound pulling with each step, as he forced himself back toward the cabin that had been his home. The moonlight guided Garrett's stumbling steps back to the cabin. His wound throbbed with each movement, blood frozen in dark patches across his nightshirt. At the doorway he steadied himself against the frame, eyes adjusting to the darkness within. Mrs. Keenan lay crumpled near the hearth where she had knelt in prayer. 3 arrows protruded from her chest, their shafts broken in the struggle. Her scalp had been torn away, blood matting what remained of her hair. The pipe she had been smoking rested inches from her outstretched hand, its contents scattered across the floorboards. On the beds where they had slept, 2 of the Pascal children lay motionless, their blankets soaked crimson. John, age 7, sprawled on the floor beside his pallet, a deep gash across his throat. Blood pooled beneath him, spreading toward the corner where Mary huddled, her own throat bearing a savage cut. The volume of blood in that corner alone could have filled a quart jar. Movement in the yard drew Garrett's attention. Through the shattered doorway, he spotted Mrs. Pascal propped against the door shutter that now lay flat in the snow. 3 broken arrow shafts jutted from her chest. She had tried to pull them out, leaving only splintered ends. Her scalp, too, had been taken, blood streaming down her face as she struggled to sit upright. A soft whimper came from the yard. Garrett found his youngest sister, just 18 months old, lying in the frozen grass beneath the north window. The raiders had grabbed her by the legs, swung her against the cabin wall, then tossed her out like a discarded doll. Moving carefully, he lifted her small body and carried her inside. By the dying embers, he wrapped her in the least bloodied blanket he could find and laid her close to the remaining warmth. Mrs. Pascal's voice, barely a whisper, called from the yard water. Garrett approached her on trembling legs. Despite her scalped head and blood-covered face, she recognized him, reaching out with a shaking hand. The cabin's water barrel stood empty. Grabbing a gourd, he limped to the lake, the same lake where the raiders had left their horses. Each step reopened his hip wound, but he filled the gourd and made his way back. Mrs. Pascal drank deeply, then slumped back against the shutter, her chest stilled. She would never move again. A day passed before a settler rode by the cabin. Garrett, feverish from his wound and exhaustion, called out weakly. The man took one look inside, then spurred his horse toward the nearest settlement to raise the alarm. The following day, neighbors arrived to bury the dead. Mrs. Keenan and 2 of her children, Mrs. Pascal and 3 of her children, 7 graves in total. When the rangers finally reached the scene, the surviving children had been taken to neighboring homesteads. Garrett's father remained unaware of the tragedy, still traveling in Arkansas with the eldest Keenan daughter. Fresh snow had covered any tracks that might have led to the raiders. Weeks later, when a group of rangers returned to collect the corn crop, 300 bushels purchased from the now returning Mr. Keenan, they found both surviving children much changed. The 18-month-old girl showed her head wound proudly, a dark bruise still visible where she had struck the cabin wall. Garrett moved slowly, his hip wound still healing, face drawn with memories no child should carry. Yet he recounted every detail to the rangers, the number of raiders, their weapons, their movements, with a clarity that belied his young age. In the days following the massacre, conflicting accounts emerged from the survivors and witnesses. Medical examinations revealed Mrs. Keenan had lived for 11 days after the attack, conscious through most of her suffering. The arrows and scalping wounds had not killed her immediately. Instead, internal injuries from the assault gradually claimed her life. The Pascal children's fates varied dramatically. Ben, the 12-year-old eldest son, survived despite being speared through the window during his escape attempt. His brother Will made it to the yard before the warriors caught him, his body bearing evidence of extensive knife wounds. Their 7-year-old brother John lingered for 3 days after receiving massive trauma to his abdomen from a heavy war club. Mary, just 4 years old, sustained severe injuries but lived, while 18-month-old Dolly emerged physically unharmed. The Keenan family losses proved equally devastating. Their 12-year-old daughter died within moments of the attack beginning. Her twin brother Garrett survived without physical injury beyond the hip wound he received during his escape. The infant, torn from Mrs. Keenan's arms and slammed against the window frame, lay unconscious in the yard until Robert's son discovered the scene. The next morning, local records placed the family's residence 3 miles south of Forestburg on the Forestburg-Decatur Road. The southeastern portion of Monong County had seen increasing settlement despite its proximity to dangerous territory. The Pascals had 5 children in total: Bill, Ben, John, Mary, and Dolly, while living with the Keenans. When Mer Keenan departed for Arkansas, he took his eldest daughter, approximately 14 years old, in the ox wagon with him, a decision that inadvertently saved her life. Government reports identified the attackers as warriors.